The night my son handed me her business card across the dinner table, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I recognized the move. I'd seen it before, years ago, in a completely different context, from a completely different person, someone trying to hand off information without being seen doing it. My son is 34 years old. He's an engineer. He doesn't rattle easily, but that evening, when he pressed the card into my palm under the edge of the tablecloth while his girlfriend was reaching for the breadbasket, his hand was shaking. I closed my fingers around it and didn't look down. Her name was Ivy Sutcliffe. She'd been dating my son for about 5 months when he brought her to my house for the first time. It was a Saturday in late April, the kind of day where you grill outside and pretend winter never happened. My wife Lorraine had been gone for 2 years by then. I still set the table the way she used to. Cloth napkins. The good glasses. Even when it's just me and my son. Ivy walked in carrying a bottle of wine and a smile that cost more than the wine. She was 41, sharp-featured, dressed in that particular way that suggests money without announcing it. She shook my hand and said, "I've heard so much about you. Your son talks about you constantly." That's the kind of thing people say. I smiled and told her she was welcome in my home. We ate outside. She asked good questions. About my career mostly. I told her the short version, 31 years as a forensic accountant. The last 12 of those consulting for a federal oversight bureau, reviewing financial records in fraud cases, now retired. Now gardening. Now grilling chicken on Saturday afternoons for my son and whoever he loves. She listened with great attention. The kind of attention that isn't really listening. It's cataloging. I noticed, but I didn't say anything, not yet. The business card happened about 6 weeks later. Second visit. She'd integrated herself into my son's life by then in the way that certain people do, quickly, completely, like water finding every crack and stone. She knew the names of his coworkers. She'd rearranged furniture in his apartment. She had a shelf. She also, apparently, had a business. The card said, Sutcliffe Capital Partners, Private Investment Solutions. Her title was Managing Partner. The address was a suite number in a building downtown that I happened to know housed about 40 different LLCs, most of them single-room offices rented by the month. On the back of the card, in my son's handwriting, tight, careful, like he practiced not making it obvious, were 7 words. "Dad, something is wrong. I need help." I put the card in my shirt pocket. My son was watching me from across the table. Ivy was talking about a vineyard she'd visited in Sonoma. I looked at my son and gave the smallest nod I could manage without it being visible to anyone else. His shoulders dropped half an inch. That was the only sign of relief he'd allow himself. I didn't call him that night. I knew better. If she was what I suspected, she'd already established patterns, knowing when he called me, how often, for how long. People who operate the way I suspected she operated are meticulous about information. Who knows what? Who talks to whom? I drove to his office the next morning and bought him a coffee from the cart on the corner. We sat on a bench outside his building and I asked him to tell me everything, and he did. It had started with the investment pitch. Subtle at first, just conversation. She'd mentioned a real estate development fund she managed, the returns her clients had been seeing. My son had expressed mild interest the way anyone does when someone they're dating talks about their work. She'd taken that mild interest and built on it, slowly over weeks. By the time he realized it had become something more than conversation, she was showing him documents, numbers, client testimonials, a term sheet with his name already filled in, for $250,000. My son doesn't have $250,000, but I do. Lorraine and I spent 40 years building a careful, quiet life. The house is paid off. There are investments. There is a modest inheritance my son would receive one day, and somewhere along the way, Ivy Sutcliffe had learned about it. She asked me about your estate, my son said, holding his coffee with both hands. Early on. Casual. Like she was just getting to know the family. But she kept coming back to it. Different questions, same subject. He paused. And then last week I found her on my laptop. She said she was just checking her email, but she'd been in my documents folder. The folder where I keep the paperwork from Mom's estate. He looked at the ground. I didn't say anything to her because I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to accuse her of something and be wrong, but he stopped. I kept thinking, what would Mom say? And I knew what Mom would say. Lorraine would have said, ask your father. I spend 4 days doing what I used to do for a living, except this time from my kitchen table. Sutcliffe Capital Partners was incorporated 18 months ago in Delaware. Its registered agent was a service company that manages hundreds of LLCs. There was a website, professional, clean, full of language about bespoke investment strategies and curated high-yield opportunities. No physical office beyond the shared suite, no verifiable client list. The testimonials were generic enough that I could have written them myself in about 20 minutes. Ivy Sutcliffe had a LinkedIn profile and a very thin digital footprint before about 3 years ago. I have a former colleague. We worked together on 3 federal cases in the 90s, now in private investigative work, and I called in a favor. What he found took another 2 days to piece together. Her name, before she changed it, 8 years ago in Nevada, was Adele Hurst. Adele Hurst had a civil judgment against her in Arizona for $180,000, an investment dispute with an elderly couple. The case had settled quietly. Before that, a similar complaint in Colorado, never brought to court. The pattern was consistent. She targeted men in their 30s with older, financially comfortable parents. She would date them for 4 to 8 months. She would identify the parents' assets. She would create urgency, usually a narrow investment window, and extract a significant sum before disappearing or, in at least 2 cases, simply stopping communication and restructuring the LLC. She had never been criminally charged. Civil suits are quiet. Settlements are quieter. And the men she'd targeted were, in most cases, too embarrassed to pursue it publicly. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called my son. I need you to do something uncomfortable, I told him. And I need you to do it without showing any change. No confrontation, no distance. Act exactly as you have been. You found something. I found enough. He was quiet for a moment. Is she dangerous? Financially predatory. I don't believe she's physically dangerous. But that doesn't mean we move carelessly. I paused. I need you to tell her that I've expressed interest in the investment. That I asked you to pass along my contact information. Dad, I know how it sounds. Trust me. He trusted me. 34 years of him trusting me and me trying to deserve it. Okay, he said. Okay. She called me 2 days later. Her voice on the phone was warm and professional, exactly the right calibration of friendly but not ouverture. She said she understood I had some questions about the fund. I told her I did. I told her I was a cautious man by nature, occupational habit, but that my son had spoken highly of the opportunity and I was willing to listen. We met for coffee the following Thursday. I wore a collared shirt and the kind of watch that says, comfortable retirement without saying anything else. I let her lead. She was good. I'll say that clearly because it's true, and because understanding exactly how good she was matters. Her pitch was layered, patient, and adapted in real time. When I pushed back, gently, doubtfully, she didn't oversell. She pulled back, expressed understanding, let me feel like I was the one in control. The documents she showed me were professionally formatted. The returns she claimed were high enough to be attractive, conservative enough to be plausible. She asked about my financial situation with the delicacy of a surgeon. Roundabout questions that built a picture. Did I have a financial advisor? Was my portfolio mostly in equities or more diversified? Had I done any private real estate investing since retiring? I answered carefully. I gave her enough to believe she was making progress. Then I said, my son mentioned you'd looked at some documents on his computer related to my wife's estate. 2 seconds of silence. Very controlled. I may have accidentally opened something. I was using his laptop and I'm sure I clicked the wrong folder. I apologize if that seemed intrusive. Not at all, I said. It's a natural curiosity. It's actually why I'm here. The estate is substantial, and I've been thinking about what to do with it. My son is my only heir." I watched her eyes. A professional can hold their face very still, but the eyes are harder to manage. Something sharpened in them. "I'm glad you came to me," she said. I met with her twice more over the following 2 weeks. Each time I moved incrementally closer to committing, expressing more enthusiasm, fewer reservations, asking the kinds of questions a motivated but inexperienced investor might ask. Each time she moved incrementally faster. The window for investment was narrowing. A partner in the fund was considering closing new positions after the end of the month. The timing was, regrettably, urgent. At the third meeting, she arrived with a subscription agreement. Pre-filled. My name, the amount, $400,000, the wire transfer details, and a clearly labeled box. "I know it's a significant step," she said. "Take all the time you need." I looked at the document for a long moment. Then I looked up at her. "Before I sign anything," I said, "I'd like to ask you something." "Of course. How long did it take you to decide on the amount? Was it based on what you thought I had, or was there a ceiling you set based on the Arizona case?" The silence this time was different. It lasted longer, and her face changed in a way I'd seen before. The very specific expression of someone who has just understood that the conversation they thought they were having was not, in fact, the one that was happening. "I don't know what you're referring to," she said. "Adele," I said. "I spent 31 years reading financial documents for a living, and the last 12 of those I spent helping prosecutors build cases against people who were considerably better at this than you are. I'm not saying that to be unkind. I'm saying it so you understand the situation clearly." I placed a folder on the table between us. Inside were printed copies of the Arizona civil judgment, the Colorado complaint, the Delaware incorporation records, the Nevada name change. Also a transcript of our first phone call, which I had recorded with her knowledge. Our state requires one-party consent, and a summary prepared by my former colleague. "My son is not going to be your next settlement," I said. "And I'm not going to be your largest one." She didn't run. I'll give her that. She sat very still for a moment, and then she picked up her copy of the subscription agreement and put it back in her bag. When she finally spoke, her voice had shed the warmth entirely. What was left was flat, precise, almost admirably composed. "You can't prove criminal intent," she said. "Everything I do is civil." "That's been true so far," I agreed. "But I've shared what I've compiled with a contact at the state attorney's office who handles financial fraud. Whether it rises to criminal charges is their determination, not mine. I imagine they'll want to speak with you." She stood up. She looked at me for a moment. Not with anger exactly. Something closer to professional assessment. "Your son is lucky," she said. "Yes," I said. "He is." She broke things off with my son 2 days later by text message. He called me after he read it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is it weird that I feel bad for her?" "No," I told him. "It means your mother and I did our job." He laughed a little. It wasn't entirely happy, but it was real. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "You told me when you were ready. That's all any of us can do." We were quiet together for a little while. Outside my kitchen window, the yard was coming into early summer. Lorraine's garden along the back fence where she used to spend Saturday mornings. I'd kept it going, some years better than others. "Dad," my son said, "can I come over this weekend? I'll bring the grill stuff." "You know where I live," I said. The state attorney's office did contact Adele about 6 weeks after our meeting. I provided everything I'd compiled. My former colleague provided his report. Whether charges were ultimately filed, I can't speak to with certainty, but I was told the Arizona civil judgment had been referred to a coordinating prosecutor who was looking at the pattern across multiple states. I hope it amounts to something. I hope the couples in Arizona and Colorado, whoever they were, know that the record exists now, that it didn't disappear. My son started seeing someone new about 6 months later. A woman he met through work. A structural engineer. Practical and direct, with a sense of humor that reminds me just a little of Lorraine's. She came to the house for the first time in November. She brought a pie she'd made herself, and she ate 2 slices, and she asked me genuine questions about the garden. I didn't profile her. I just talked to her. There's a difference between vigilance and suspicion, and it took me a long time in my career to understand which one was worth keeping. Vigilance is a tool you use when something is wrong. Suspicion is a habit that makes everything look wrong, and it will hollow you out if you let it. Lorraine used to say that the job had made me good at reading bad situations, but I had to be careful not to go looking for them. She was right. She usually was. My son's birthday is in March. We had people over, his friends, his girlfriend, her brother who turned out to be a very good cook and spent most of the evening at my grill like he owned it. I sat in the yard in the early spring dark and watched my son laugh at something his girlfriend said, and I thought about the shaking hand pressing that business card into my palm, and about how much courage it took him to ask for help without saying the words out loud. I never told him how proud that made me. Maybe I will. There's time. That's the thing about getting older that nobody warns you about. You start to understand which things you have time for and which things you don't, and the list reorganizes itself in ways that surprise you. He's a good man, my son. He came by it honestly. His mother made sure of that. I'm just the one who checks the math. I've thought about that afternoon a lot since it happened. Not the confrontation itself. That part was almost routine, if I'm honest, in the way that any task feels routine once you've done the underlying work carefully enough. What I keep coming back to is the moment before it, sitting at that coffee table across from Ivy, watching her place the subscription agreement between us, like she was doing me a favor, and thinking, she has no idea how long I've been watching her. That's the thing about choices made in the dark. They don't stay dark. Not always, not immediately, but eventually the ledger comes due in one form or another. Ivy had spent years refining a method that worked precisely because her targets never saw it coming. She relied on invisibility, on the assumption that a retired man in his 60s, comfortable and a little lonely, would be too trusting or too proud to ask for help. What she didn't account for was that my son trusted me enough to ask. 7 words on the back of a business card. That's all it took to change the entire equation. I don't think my son knew exactly what I'd find. He just knew something was wrong, and he knew to bring it to me. That took more courage than people might realize. He was afraid of being wrong. Afraid of accusing someone he cared about without proof. Afraid, maybe, of looking naive in front of his father. He handed me that card anyway. That's what moral clarity actually looks like in practice. Not certainty, but the willingness to act on what you know, despite the discomfort of not knowing everything. And that willingness came from somewhere. It came from years of Lorraine and me trying to raise a person who understood that honesty, even when it cost you something, is still the right call. You can't teach that in a single conversation. It accumulates. Every time we told him the truth about something uncomfortable, every time we held ourselves to the same standard we asked of him. You don't see it working while it's working. You only see it later, in moments like that. A shaking hand, a folded card, 7 words that said everything. The intelligence part. Knowing what to do with the information, how to build a case, how to move without tipping your hand. That's craft. That's 30 years of work. But craft without character is just manipulation pointed in a different direction. Ivy was intelligent. She'd constructed something genuinely sophisticated. Intelligence in service of taking from people is still a waste of it. And somewhere in her history, she'd made a series of choices that led her to that coffee shop, handing a pre-filled contract to someone who'd spent his career doing exactly what she was trying to do to his son. There's a cause and effect in that I find worth sitting with. Not as punishment exactly. More as consequence. The patterns we build with our choices accumulate just as surely as the good ones do. She'd relied for years on silence, on people being too embarrassed or too exhausted to pursue it, on civil courts being quieter than criminal ones, on each individual incident looking small enough in isolation. But patterns leave records. Records outlast silence. What she'd been building across those years was, without her knowing it, a case against herself. What I was building across those same years, without meaning to, without ever framing it that way, was a son who knew to come to me. I'll take that trade.